Hello and welcome. My name is Wendy Hewitson and I'm the Agri-Tech Programme Manager for Barclays Eagle Labs. Today you have joined us to look at the longer term implications of coronavirus for the UK agricultural industry. So we have the pleasure today of introducing James Lowenberg-DeBoer, who is the Elizabeth Creek Chair of Agri-Tech Applied Economics and Sciences at Harper Adams University. We have asked James here today to provide you with some hints and tips on those longer term implications. The topics discussed are an overview of options for you to think about and for you to help with your independent research and business decisions. So these aren't intended as recommendations or advice. Remember, as well as that, your business has its own individual circumstances, so the statements and views expressed may not be applicable to you or your business or suitable for your business use. So what I'm going to do today is just give you a quick overview of what James Lowenberg-DeBoer does with Harper Adams. He has had over 30 years expertise within the industry, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say around the longer term implications for UK agriculture. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to James. Morning, James.
Thank you, Wendy. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning and share some thoughts about the longer term implications of the coronavirus for UK agriculture. The short term impacts of the disruptions of the food chain and other impacts of the COVID-19 virus have been amply covered in the media. So we've all seen the photos and perhaps participated in the shoppers queuing outside of stores. We've seen the websites that have suspended their ordering and home delivery because they're overwhelmed by demand. But very soon we're going to need to start to think about what are the longer term implications for food security and the profitability of the UK food system. What happens after we have a COVID-19 vaccine or we have an effective treatment? What effects of this pandemic will persist? So what I would like to do today is to discuss those longer term opportunities and challenges created by the COVID-19 pandemic for UK agriculture, and specifically to look at the worldwide context. So what's being said about those longer term impacts in general and on agriculture specifically, and then to think specifically for UK agriculture. How will agriculture in 5 or 10 years be different? And just to put this in historical context, historians have demonstrated that pandemics in the past have had major impacts on society and the economy in general and on agriculture. So one of the best examples is the bubonic plague in the Middle Ages. Killed so many workers that wage rates increased. And because of the higher wages and the shortage of workers, sheep production in Britain grew because that required less labor, whereas grain production with the technology of the time was very labor intensive. The feudal system was undermined and serfdom became less onerous. So even where serfdom survived, they changed the rules a bit because otherwise serfs would run off and find opportunities elsewhere. There was institutional innovation, for instance, in new forms of tenancy, and it set in motion the process of developing labor-saving technologies that are key to modern agriculture. So the online media is focused on the short-term impacts. So we've all seen those. Surge in demand at supermarkets and empty shelves, supply chain disruptions as restaurants and institutional food service shut down, and processors were unable to quickly enough adapt their processes to change packaging, to change products, to fit the individual consumer market through supermarkets that was actually being having an increase in demand. We've seen problems with travel by seasonal foreign workers, leading to perishable crops rotting in fields for lack of harvest labor. There's been some cross-border fruit and vegetable shipment delay because of quarantines and other restrictions, and export restrictions in some places for grains, oil seeds, and other food products. And those are all very, very important topics, and they'll be very important short-term implications, but that's not the focus today. The focus today is on a longer-term impacts. And if we think about what some of that general discussion is, well, there's general discussion about a change in consumer preferences and expectations by individuals as citizens, as employees, and as consumers. And those changes will impact on how we live, how we work, how we use technology. And the institutions and organizations that absorb those changes and understand them will be able to adapt their strategies, and they will then succeed better in the coming period. One of the best examples is the growth in online commerce that has been forced on many consumers, even those that up till now had not been doing much online ordering because of the lockdown. And there's other impacts in terms of increasing the need for resilience and flexibility in supply chains. And the questioning of the efficacy of the long distance supply chains that we've increasingly come to depend on in recent decades. In terms of agriculture, the discussion has been mainly in general terms. So if you look at the KPMG website in Australia, they talk about medium to long-term impacts, including shifts in food demand, logistics, supply chain. Brent Gloy, who's a Nebraska farmer in the US and an ag economist, he on his blog observes intermediate to longer term demand shifts from agricultural products related to changes in consumer incomes, maybe an impact where consumers eat. Do they eat more at home in the future versus away from home? And because he's Nebraska, he market for grain in that part of North America. If we look at the thoughts from Jason Lusk, who's head of the Agricultural Economics Department at Purdue, he sees an increase in automation all through the food supply chain. So in agriculture, in harvesting, but also in processing and even in the supermarket level of retail. He suspects that on the consumer side, there'll be more focus on nationalism and populism and skepticism about imported foods and so on. He particularly is worried about the impact on meat processing. In the US, this has been a big issue where a number of major meat processing facilities have closed down because of COVID-19 outbreaks among their employees. But this is then linked in the US to a discussion about breaking up packers and excessive concentration in that industry. And finally, his last point there is that he's thinking, well, we might step back a little bit from some of the focus in recent years about specialized food products, about plant-based, organic, other things that we would like, or many consumers would like, but may seem somewhat less priority in the post-COVID-19 world. If we look at David Silberman from University of California, Berkeley, he also is thinking about increases in automation and reduced dependence on on migrants, and thinking about how government may start thinking of food security as part of national security. He brings up the point of zoonotic diseases and the link between, for instance, the African swine flu, which led to the death of many pigs in China in 2019, and that linked to an increased reliance on wild sources of protein, which would have been sold in the Hunan wet market and led to a transfer of a virus from animals to humans. But overall, this question of zoonotic diseases and how do we manage them, he's thinking about acceptance of GMOs and whether that might be part of the solution to some of the issues raised by COVID-19. And overall, he's thinking about barriers to trade and development of an ideology that would emphasize less dependence on imports, carrying more inventories, less of that just-on-time mentality. So at Harper, we've been thinking about these issues, and a group of staff have gotten together online, because we're all working from home, to think about some of these questions. And some of the key questions that we came up with and that we've talked about and discussed is the impact of COVID-19 on consumer preferences. What will persist? We've talked about supply chain disruptions, and will COVID-19 put the brakes on globalization of the food supply? A third question that we've discussed is how will farm work get done in post-COVID-19 UK? And then lastly, thinking about some of those public policy challenges. And those questions in a little bit more detail are available on the Harper Adams website. So if we think about changing food preferences, in the longer run, regardless of COVID-19 and the experience there, consumer preferences will be determined by price, convenience, and habit. After things settle down, that's where British consumers will likely recenter their consumer choices. They're unlikely to willingly pay higher food prices, even if foods are more locally sourced and maybe from more reliable sources and so on. COVID-19 may change some habits. For instance, some consumers have been introduced to online ordering and home delivery, and they may like the convenience of that and continue those services even after the pandemic is history. This is also an opportunity for veg box, meat box, and other schemes to convince consumers that they provide value for money. They're getting lots of new customers now, but those customers need to be convinced that this is value for their money. And probably UK consumers will maintain their taste for out-of-season produce and products from warmer climates. And this includes fresh vegetables in the wintertime, so lettuce and tomatoes and peppers, and also bananas and citrus and other things that are unlikely to be produced in the United Kingdom. Question is, how do those companies ensure reliability in those supply chains? We think in our discussions at Harper, I think we agree that the impact on company strategy may in fact be larger and longer lasting than it will be on consumers. Companies that lost a substantial amount of money because of supply chain disruption will probably build more resiliency into their future plans. For non-perishable foods, that reliability might be with improved storage capacity. But the question is, who will pay for that capacity? Because the margins in the food business are small, and so will there need to be a public policy intervention to help them cover those extra costs? For produce and other perishable foods, diversification of sources closer to home could make that supply more resilient. And the key question is, are there currently imported foods that with the right technology and the right business model could be produced in the UK? And one of the cases in point is use of indoor farming, or vertical farming as it's sometimes called, like the photo at the right side of the slide. Could that be used to grow, for instance, some winter vegetables that could be marketed much more widely in the UK? There's also the question of changing market channels. So it's clear that producing and processing food for a single type of buyer, so processing for restaurants and food service or processing for supermarkets, can cut costs and improve quality, but that results in supply chains that are vulnerable to disruption. So if there's a quick change, so if all the restaurants and food service shuts down because of the pandemic and that market isn't there, it's not easy for those processors to quickly shift to other types of containers, other types of products. Often it's the farmer who's left holding the bag when they can't sell their product on any price, at any price, because the processors are at capacity. And this is what happened with farmers dumping milk or destroying vegetables that had no market. In the future, will food processors build more flexibility into their supply chain? For instance, being able to change some of those issues. If the cost of the disruption is included in long-term profit estimation, does that flexibility increase or decrease the cost to the consumer? And that remains to be determined. So farm work, how will farm work be done? So COVID-19 has revealed the difficulties with the strategy of depending on seasonal foreign workers to grow and harvest vegetables and fruits. Some farms in the UK have been able to recruit among the newly unemployed UK workers, but that's unlikely to be a long-term strategy. Yes, they can probably find some UK workers now who would like to get out of the house during the shutdown and earn some money while they're unemployed, but it's unlikely that many of those people will change their long-term career plans. If there were currently practical fruit and vegetable robots on the market, many farmers would probably order them. But there's engineering challenges that remain, and there's legal and regulatory issues. Robots for automation of combinable crops, so grain, oil seeds, are closer to practicality. The hands-free hectare at Harper has shown that, but there's still legal and regulatory challenges that affect commercialization. If food supply is a national security issue, as David Silberman, for instance, argues, will farm automation become an increasing research and development priority? And in terms of public policy, I think the pandemic has revealed some things that need to be rethought. So if we think about the UK farm policy debate in the most recent election, mostly focused on environmental management. Parties competed in terms of their promises of how many trees they were going to plant. There was very little discussion of food security, but the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted those food supply issues, and it's revealed the number of British citizens who are food insecure. So finding a balance between food security and environmental management then becomes one of the key issues in the future of farm public policy debates. Now, there's also the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the necessity and the limits of international cooperation in public health and in trade. And so there will be a need to re-examine that issue. Brexit, which hangs over all of this discussion, may complicate adaptation post-COVID-19, but it may also give Britain greater flexibility in some aspects because they can choose a plan that satisfies the needs of the UK population without respect to the broader EU needs, which may be somewhat different. So, take-home message. During COVID-19 lockdown, some UK consumers have discovered the convenience of ordering food online and home delivery. This may affect their purchasing patterns long term, and it's quite evident that people purchase somewhat differently if they're ordering online for home use versus going out to a restaurant. So, for instance, beef producers in the UK have discovered that steaks and prime rib and some of the higher value cuts are not moving as quickly now because at-home consumers have tended to focus on mince and other products that are more easily prepared. Businesses who experience severe supply disruptions may put more emphasis in the future on resilience and flexibility, being able to quickly adjust processing, marketing, logistics plans. COVID-19 may speed up the trend toward greater automation in agricultural production and through the rest of the food chain in processing and also in retailing. But particularly in the production part of it, the timeline is uncertain, both because of engineering challenges and because of legal regulatory hurdles. In public policy, the challenge will be balancing food security and environmental management. And overall, the COVID-19 pandemic makes clear that, as in public health, data analysis and expertise are essential in making farm and food supply decisions. So there's more detail on these issues on the Harper website, and I'd be pleased to hear from you any comments or questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. To say that was really, really interesting. I think, as I say, it'll have raised quite a few questions, and hopefully quite a lot of people have absorbed what you were talking about there. And as you say, covering some of the major opportunities and also a lot of the challenges that are out there for the UK agriculture sector. So, like I said, this is all around, as say, we do not endorse any of the content on here. It is all about you making your own decisions. So the topics discussed are an overview of the options. And if you want to look at any of these further, obviously, please do make your business decisions with the relevant expertise in the background. So if you're like me, you've got a few things mulling around in your head now. And I know James will be more than happy to answer any of the questions that arise from this. Once we've finished the topic today, there will be a slide comes up, and it will have either a QR code or a link to enable you to give feedback on the event. And there will also be a link to our Eagle Labs support hub, where again, we are looking for you to put your thoughts together and come to us with what you would like to see for future events. At the end of the day, we're all in this together and we need to stay connected. So I think you'll agree with me. Thank you very much, James. Have you got sort of 3 final words or 3 key learns that we can take away from today's session?
Well, the key final words are stay healthy, so that we do have the chance to look at these longer term issues. But there'll be a big difference between the short term impacts of COVID-19 and those longer term effects that persist into the next years. Thank you.
That was really nice. Thank you very much, James. And as I say, the next slide that comes up will give the opportunity to give feedback on this event and also submit any suggestions you have for further events. So thank you very much for joining Barclays Eagle Labs today and Professor James Lowenberg-DeBoer around the longer implications and challenges, opportunities deriving in the UK agriculture from COVID-19. Thank you.